Prospective jurors called yesterday to the Manhattan Federal Courthouse for the trial of 8 alleged members or associates of the Cosa Nostra's ruling commission were tested on their familiarity with mob history, with a list of more than 200 names that amounted to a who's who organized crime. U.S. District Court Judge Richard Owen brushed aside requests from 3 defendants to delay the trial and asked jury candidates to complete the 10-page questionnaire that included the 5 men Carlo Gambino, Vito Genovese, Joseph Colombo, Thomas Lucchese, and Joseph Bonanno, key names in the Cosa Nostra families of New York City. 2 defendants refused to enter pleas. Anthony Cardinale, attorney for reputed Genovese boss Anthony Salerno, said Salerno's mental ability had been affected by the removal of a growth near his right eye on Thursday, and that he was incapable of proceeding. Owen entered a not guilty plea for Salerno. Carmine Persico, the reputed Colombo boss who is acting as his own attorney, told Owen he thought he should not be tried until the U.S. Court of Appeals decides his claim of double jeopardy. Owen said that there was no bar to Persico's being on trial. "Then I enter a plea of not guilty," Persico said. Gerald McMahon, attorney for reputed Colombo underboss Gennaro Langella, reminded Owen that Langella was joined in the appeal with Persico and refused to plead. Owen entered a not guilty plea for Langella. Pleading not guilty were Anthony Indelicato, identified as a Bonanno soldier, Anthony Corallo, Salvatore Santoro, and Christopher Furnari, identified as boss, underboss, and consigliere of the Lucchese family, and Ralph Scopo, a reputed Colombo capo. By day's end, 12 prospective jurors were placed in the jury box. Questioning continues today. Sometime in the early 80s, Paul Castellano, the reputed boss of the Gambino crime family, who was nicknamed the Pope, issued what might be called the 2 Commandments, a pair of anti-narcotics laws for his family members. The first commandment to come down from Castellano's home on the Hill, Tot Hill in Staten Island, forbade dealing in narcotics. The second barred anyone convicted of a narcotics charge from 1962 on from ever becoming an initiated or made family member. Drug dealing would be punishable by death, Castellano decreed. By causing his own men who could not resist the lure of drug profits to fear for their lives, Castellano unknowingly set in motion a chain of events that, investigators say, would lead to his own killing and thrust into the arms of law enforcement a frightened informant who would help them solve the murder. On December 16th last year, 3 men pumped 6 bullets into Castellano's head and chest as he stepped out of his Lincoln Town car on East 46th Street in Manhattan. The trench-coated gunman also cut down Castellano's driver and alleged underboss, Thomas Bellotti, in a fusillade of direct gunshots before they disappeared into the chilly night. At bail revocation hearings in June, Assistant U.S. Attorneys Robert LaRusso and Douglas Grover said that the murders were plotted by John Gotti, then a reputed capo in the Gambino family, and Angelo Ruggiero, an accused member of Gotti's faction known as the Bergen Crew, a reference to their headquarters at the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club in Ozone Park, Queens. John Gotti's attorney, Bruce Cutler, has said that Gotti's knowledge of the Castellano murder is limited to what he has read about it in newspapers. He said that Gotti and Ruggiero are simply close personal friends. But prosecutors said the killings were triggered by the fears of some of Gotti's crew that no one was in greater violation of Castellano's commandments than Ruggiero and Gotti's brother, Eugene. Information gleaned from federal listening devices in Castellano's kitchen and Ruggiero's home indicates that the 2 men feared Castellano was going to have them killed as a result of their arrests on August 23, 1983, on heroin trafficking charges. Since then, another result of the commandments has surfaced. Dominic Lofaro, a 56-year-old Gambino soldier who has admitted to performing 15 mob-related hits himself, became what federal officials say is the first made member of the Cosa Nostra to wear a hidden microphone and work as an informer against a family. Investigators said Lofaro, after being arrested upstate in 1984 on charges of trying to sell heroin to an undercover officer, feared he would be executed if word of the bust got back to Castellano. The arrest was kept secret, and he agreed to circulate through the Gambino family, recording conversations. Information supplied by Lofaro and the bugs he helped place have led investigators to say that Gotti's chauffeur was one of the 3 men who shot Castellano down, and that Eugene Gotti was among at least 8 Gotti crew members near the death scene that night. A telling tale of the tape. Castellano's murder occurred 14 days after the cancer death of Agnello Della Croce, the family underboss who had helped stall Castellano's demand for transcripts of FBI wiretaps and bugs placed in Ruggiero's Cedarhurst home. The transcripts had been handed to Ruggiero's lawyers, as the law requires, by the prosecution after he was indicted in the 1983 narcotics arrest. Ruggiero and other members of Gotti's crew had told Castellano after their arrests that they were not directly involved in heroin deals. But the 1982 tapes, federal sources said, show that they lied. In June 1985, Castellano had learned that the Ruggiero tapes had been used by the FBI to get a court's permission to bug Castellano's home. Those bugs, he learned, had led to his own federal indictment, and that of the entire Cosa Nostra Commission, now on trial in Manhattan Federal Court. The Ruggiero tapes would show that Ruggiero had not only dealt in narcotics, but had also gossiped with non-made men about both the Commission and Castellano. If Castellano got the tapes, he would have had justification for murdering Ruggiero, Eugene Gotti, John Carneglia, John Gotti's bodyguard, and even John Gotti himself. The tapes also reveal Castellano's unsuccessful attempt to bar from membership in all other Cosa Nostra families anyone who had been arrested on narcotics-related charges after 1962. The cut-off date is not explained. Castellano, a poultry magnate, preferred that his family members make their money in more legitimate business enterprises, such as concrete, trucking, or pornography. Since the 1940s, some mob bosses have opposed drug dealing for several reasons. It draws more police attention than other crimes. The penalties can be stiff, and addicts facing long sentences often become informants. And some traditionalists think a trade that turns children and teenagers into junkies is not in keeping with the old Cosa Nostra ideals of being a man of honor. The Bergen crew's involvement in drugs, however, was difficult to hide from Castellano. When Ruggiero, Eugene Gotti, and 6 others were arrested and charged with dealing in bulk amounts of heroin bought from wholesalers in Florida and flown to the New York area. Investigators charged that Ruggiero had taken over a lucrative heroin operation from his brother, Salvatore, who died in 1982 when a small plane crashed into the sea off Georgia on its way toward an airstrip in southern Florida. A small amount of heroin was found in the wreckage. But for more than a year before Ruggiero's arrest, a listening device planted in his home had provided federal authorities with information that went beyond heroin dealing. Conversations between Ruggiero and his house guests revealed a long-simmering hatred of Castellano, who came to power in 1976 after the death of his brother-in-law Carlo Gambino, as well as fear of retribution for violating the drug ban. Ruggiero, Della Croce's nephew, had acted as his uncle's eyes and ears within the family after Della Croce became disabled from cancer and confined to his Staten Island home. In his testimony to the President's Commission on Organized Crime, Martin Light, a former mob attorney convicted on a drug charge, explained the dynamics of a crime family split into 2 factions. There was one faction, Della Croce's, that was involved with drugs, and they were making a lot of money. They were big earners, very well-respected faction of the Gambino family because of their wealth. And the whole idea was to keep it secret from the other faction of the Gambino family, which was against it, Light testified. The campaign to remove Castellano probably began to take shape in early 1982, as members of the Gotti crew became aware of their precarious situation. A review of FBI affidavits, trial transcripts, and wiretaps reveals, on April 22, 1982, Castellano chaired a meeting on the matter of Peter Tambone, one of his reputed soldiers who had been identified by an informant as a heroin dealer. John Gotti was present at the meeting, and if he had any doubts about Castellano's willingness to carry out his threat, they evaporated, federal investigators said, when Castellano ordered Tambone killed. On an April 25, 1982 tape, Ruggiero warned Tambone that his life was in jeopardy. Ruggiero, "Pete, listen to me. Listen to me like a brother. I'm telling you, worse comes to worse, get your wife and take off." At a conversation between Ruggiero and Ed Lino, a family associate who would later be arrested with Ruggiero on the heroin charge, Ruggiero and Lino apparently discussed the prospect of killing the informer who had ratted out Tambone to Castellano, and then justifying the murder by saying that the rat had sold heroin. A government-sanctioned warning. If Tambone needed any further evidence that he was in trouble, he didn't have to wait long. 4 days later, on April 30th, an FBI agent named Arthur Ruffles was authorized to warn Tambone that there was a contract on his life. He did. Tambone rushed to Ruggiero's home the same day, where Ruggiero again urged Tambone to leave the city with his family. Ruggiero told Tambone it was unfortunate this was happening to him, but that Castellano wanted to make an example of him. In late 1983, Tambone was called before a federal grand jury in the Eastern District and asked a series of questions about the membership of the Gambino family. He reportedly stopped answering when he was asked about Paul Castellano. He was found in contempt, spent 9 months in jail, and was released in mid-1984. He is still alive. On April 29, 1982, Ruggiero told Lino that the commission was split evenly on whether people who had been arrested for narcotics should be allowed into the Cosa Nostra. In telling Lino, a non-family member, about commission business, Ruggiero was violating a basic Cosa Nostra rule, another offense punishable by death. So brazen was Ruggiero in his defiance of Castellano that at the same time as he was talking to outsiders about commission business, dealing heroin, and warning associates of proposed hits, he was also borrowing huge sums of money from the boss. On May 23, 1982, during the same period in which he was dealing with narcotics, Ruggiero told Robert DiBernardo, a pornography dealer who has since disappeared and who authorities believe is dead, that he had personally borrowed $100,000 from Castellano. Ever the good businessman, Castellano was receiving a half-point interest, $500, a week from Ruggiero, money that could have linked Castellano to a narcotics conspiracy. Events leading to Castellano's death continued to snowball in January 1983, as Ruggiero began to worry about his own life and build outside allies for Della Croce, Gotti, himself, and the Bergen crew. During a meeting at the since-closed Casa Storta restaurant in Brooklyn on January 26, 1983, Ruggiero told an associate that Castellano had issued an edict that members could no longer visit the ailing Della Croce at his home. It appeared as though Castellano was trying to isolate Della Croce. "Anybody going to see Neil is knocked out," he says. Then he adds, "I think he's going to whack Neil." Ruggiero says Castellano is unworthy of respect. He badmouths his own family. The FBI bugs Castellano. 2 months later, in mid-March 1983, FBI agents secretly entered Castellano's expansive home, planting listening devices in his kitchen and living room. As legal justification, federal agents cited evidence gathered on the Ruggiero bugs. These bugs helped lead to Castellano's 1985 racketeering indictments as head of a car theft ring and in the commission case. Thus, Ruggiero, Eugene Gotti, and Carneglia violated the cardinal rule. They were involved in narcotics in such a way as to implicate other family members, in this case, Castellano himself. The split between the two factions widened as the possibility of execution became more real. On June 8, 1985, said LaRusso at Ruggiero's bail hearing, Mr. Castellano visited Mr. Della Croce. Mr. Castellano tells Mr. Della Croce, I want those tapes. What is so significant about the boss of the crime family asking one of his underlings and Ruggiero's home the next day? The FBI picked one of his soldiers for taped conversations, which are used to incriminate him in an ongoing indictment. We know from an informant's testimony of what was developing between Angelo Ruggiero and Paul Castellano. Mr. Castellano was blaming Mr. Ruggiero for his problems. Mr. Ruggiero was indicted for narcotic distribution. He had violated the prohibition which he knew would draw the sanction of murder, and these tapes, if given to Mr. Castellano, would in fact confirm that. Castellano's ultimatum on June 8th led Della Croce and the Bergen crew to seriously consider starting a civil war. I can tell him Castellano to go himself, and we will have war, Della Croce told Ruggiero, unaware that an FBI bug in his home was recording the conversation. You may get hurt, continued Della Croce. I may get hurt. Other people may get hurt as well. And we don't want that. No, Ruggiero agreed. He didn't want that either. Still, he refused to give the tapes to Castellano. Ruggiero told Della Croce that he stalled Castellano by telling him that he didn't want to rat on friends of ours. Della Croce apparently stalled Castellano further by telling him that Ruggiero was embarrassed by various domestic scenes recorded on the bug. As of December 1985, Ruggiero was still stalling his boss. On December 2nd, Della Croce, Ruggiero's protector, died. Castellano did not attend the wake. Ruggiero and John Gotti, LaRusso said in court, then took the bold move to eliminate Castellano before they themselves were. On December 16th, Castellano and Bellotti drove up to Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. They had a reservation under the name Bowl, according to police. Castellano was shot dead before he got out of the Lincoln Town car, his body slumped on the sidewalk, his legs exposed, showing socks monogrammed with a designer's PC logo, initials that were his own as well. His 2 commandments died with him. Ever since the gold rush days of prohibition ended in 1933, the narcotics trade has been the Cosa Nostra's most lucrative criminal enterprise. Over the years, some bosses have tried to enforce a commission prohibition against dealing in drugs, reflecting the deep divisions within the mob regarding narcotics. On one hand, many of its members are heavily involved in heroin and cocaine importing, which are the biggest money makers for their crime families. On the other hand, many of the same members risk execution at the hands of their own bosses for dealing in dope. Paul Castellano, the reputed head of the Gambino family, until his assassination in December last year, passed 2 anti-narcotics laws in the early 1980s. One law decreed that any family member dealing in narcotics in such a way as to implicate other family members with law enforcement agencies, as described in an FBI affidavit, would be executed. The second law barred anyone arrested on narcotics charges since 1962 from ever becoming a made member, a soldier in the crime family. Castellano was so determined to outlaw narcotics throughout the Cosa Nostra that he brought his program to a vote of the New York Commission. Wiretaps and bugs on conversations between reputed members of the Gambino family highlight the schism within the mob over this issue. An FBI bug in April 1982 on Long Island recorded a conversation between reputed family member Angelo Ruggiero of Cedarhurst and Eddie Lino of Fort Salonga, who investigators say was an associate, not a made member. At that time, according to a still pending indictment handed up in 1983, Ruggiero, Lino and others were making major heroin deals. The FBI overheard this conversation. Ruggiero: "You know what's wrong? There's a 2-2 decision right now. Anybody that was pinched with drugs from 1962 on never gets straightened out, becomes a member." Lino: Is that official? Ruggiero. Not yet, explaining the split 2-2 vote. The Gambino and Colombo families voted for the ban. The Bonanno and Lucchese families voted against it, and the Genovese were, for some reason, not involved. Lino. That kills me. Isn't that sickening? Ruggiero. I got pinched with junk. Lino. Who says nice guys can't work? Laughs. Ruggiero. Keep your fingers crossed. 'Cause they may call in the whole commission in the whole United States. If they do that, I got a funny feeling. Though Castellano ordered the murder of family members dealing in narcotics, Ruggiero was trying to circumvent the ruling. In one conversation with Peter Tambone, who was to be tried at a commission meeting for helping a fellow mobster in a deal that Tambone apparently hadn't realized involved heroin, Ruggiero advised. Ruggiero. Pete, listen to me like a brother. I'm telling you, worse comes to worse, get your wife and take off. The next day, Ruggiero and Ed Lino apparently discussed killing the man who got Tambone in trouble instead of killing Tambone as Castellano's rule would require. Ruggiero. Whatever Pete Tambone told you yesterday, this stays between me and you. Lino. You should whack him. Ruggiero. Me and Johnny, apparently reputed capo John Gotti, are gonna whack him. Lino. Kill the bastard, he deals in heroin. Imitating saying why they did it, referring to the mobster Tambone had helped. Ruggiero. This is the way, yeah. We can't do it right away. Lino. No, you don't want it to come back. FBI agents now believe Lino's last remark meant they didn't want to make it obvious to Castellano that they hoped to save Tambone by killing the man responsible for his troubles. Tambone was not killed. Castellano's attempts to keep his men and members of other families out of narcotics have had years of precedents and failures. Joe Valachi, in his Senate Rackets Committee testimony in 1963, said the Genovese family to which he belonged was barred from narcotics in 1948 when acting boss Frank Costello ordered no narcotics. You are in serious trouble if you are arrested for narcotics. You have another trial after having a trial with the government. That rule affected only his family. But in 1957, Valachi testified, all families were notified. No narcotics. Valachi said that was a commission ruling. Joe Bonanno, former head of the family bearing his name, confirmed in his memoirs that the commission had passed such an edict in 1956. But, Valachi said, soldiers and some bosses defied the rules because of the enormous profits involved. They would chance their lives, he testified. More recently, James Fratiano, who has testified against many of his mob associates, said that when he was initiated as a MAID member, while I was in the room, they say that you cannot fool around with narcotics because it drew too much heat on the families. But even bosses and captains cannot turn their backs on the billions of dollars the trade brings each year. Most law enforcement sources say the New York families continue as a major factor in the heroin market, which is estimated at between $25 billion and $40 billion a year nationally, and as a smaller factor in the cocaine trade, which is estimated at up to $70 billion. We've had no indication at all that traditional organized crime has withdrawn from the narcotics trade, says Deputy Chief Francis Hall, commanding officer of the New York Police Department's Narcotics Division. Even if Castellano ordered his family out of the trade, though there is some doubt he was obeyed, other families are still in it, Hall said. Travis McGee and the families. An undercover operative, codenamed Travis McGee by the FBI when he worked for the Bureau in Florida after the beach-loving hero of John MacDonald novels, told Newsday some families, especially Gambino, Lucchese, and Carlos Marcello of New Orleans, began importing cocaine in the mid-1970s and have become more active in recent years. They bring it into Florida by the boatload, he said. They buy directly from the people in Colombia, bypassing Colombian importers up here. A branch of the Bonanno family, Travis McGee says, is still active despite the arrest of 22 alleged members accused of smuggling $1.6 billion in heroin from Italy and Brazil between 1975 and 1984 and selling it out of pizza parlors. The so-called Pizza Connection trial is now underway in Manhattan. The Genovese family, originally headed by Charles Lucky Luciano, who developed the Corsican-Sicilian-French connection in the 1950s, using European labs to refine Turkish opium into heroin for US sales, remains a major factor in narcotics, according to the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration. New York families, says the DEA, are the importers. To insulate themselves, they use low-level Cosa Nostra associates to sell their product to wholesalers, many of them made members who are sneaking, as Valachi put it. Wholesalers sell it in diluted form to distributors. According to FBI agent Frank Panessa, who infiltrated a Philadelphia branch of the Pizza Connection, one member boasted that the Sicilians were given the total distribution rights of heroin from Sicily to the United States as a reward for assassinating Carmine Galante, then head of the Bonanno family. Galante was killed in a Brooklyn restaurant in 1979 because he wouldn't share his drug business or drug traffic with anyone else in the family. FBI agent Joseph Pistone, who had infiltrated the Bonanno group, testified he was told by Benjamin Ruggiero, no relation to Angelo, a family soldier. According to the DEA, the Sicilian Mafia currently pays about $13,000 for a kilo, 2.2 pounds, of morphine base produced in Asia. After converting it to heroin, it sells each kilo to its New York importer for about $175,000. The importer gets around $230,000 a kilo from wholesalers, who cut it and triple or quadruple their investment when they sell to distributors. After that single kilo is again cut several times by distributors and street dealers, it is sold in dime $10 bags, bringing in about $2 million. A crowded drug market. But Ralph Salerno, former head of the NYPD Organized Crime Squad and now a consultant to congressional committees and law enforcement authorities, says the families have lost their old monopoly on drugs to new competitors. The mob's still in the heroin business to some extent, Salerno said. But if you look at the people being arrested today, Cubans, Colombians, Bulgarians, Yugoslavs, Asians, Israelis and others, it's obvious more stuff is coming in from more sources than anybody can control. The government can't control it, and the mob can't control it. Cosa Nostra's percentage of the market is infinitesimal compared to what it was in the old days. They probably controlled everything. Now I doubt whether they control more than 15 or 20% of the combined heroin and coke markets. While law enforcement agents are watching mobsters, the mobsters are often watching the agents, or at least trying to. FBI transcripts of conversations involving Gambino crime family members reflect their preoccupation with law enforcement wiretaps and show how they tried to penetrate the telephone company and the office of Nassau County District Attorney Dennis Dillon. In 1982, listening devices were planted in the Cedarhurst home of Angelo Ruggiero, a reputed soldier in the Gambino crime family, later indicted on narcotics charges. In the taped conversations, Ruggiero and several others discussed purchasing bulk amounts of heroin from wholesale dealers in Florida. In the middle of one conversation, recorded on April 24, 1982, there are indications that Ruggiero and several associates were aware of the FBI wiretap. A transcript of a conversation shows Ruggiero talking with John Gotti, a reputed soldier in the family and the brother of John Gotti, now described by authorities as the family boss, and Jack Conroy, identified by federal prosecutors as a retired New York City police detective working as a private investigator. Ruggiero: "It's a legal wiretap there." Gotti: "It's illegal." Ruggiero: "Legal. And I'm not the target of the investigation. It's coming out of the Southern District." Conroy. Southern District. March 18th. Ruggiero's phones were, in fact, tapped, federal officials say, but they won't discuss details of how or when the wiretaps were authorized. Federal court records on 1983 drug-dealing charges against Ruggiero and Gotti show Ruggiero's phone was tapped on November 9, 1981. An electronic listening device, also known as a bug, was planted in his house on April 5, 1982, and it picked up the April 24th conversation between Ruggiero, Gotti, and Conroy. Assistant U.S. Attorney Robert LaRusso last week said the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn has been investigating whether secret information about these wiretap orders had been leaked and obtained by subjects of the bugs. According to the transcripts, anxious Gambino family members discuss with Conroy a plan to pay a telephone company employee to find out if their home phones have been tapped. And, in an unrelated conversation, there are discussions of passing a bribe to someone close to Dylan, just to get the hook in. After discussing possible taps on 4 family members' phones, Ruggiero tells Conroy to go to a contact in the phone company with a package deal. $2,000 to check 4 phones. Conroy agrees, saying, "He'll do it. He'll do it." Efforts to reach Conroy were unsuccessful. A John Conroy, an ex-detective from North Belmore, and the only private detective named Conroy registered in the state, told Newsday last week that he was not the Conroy mentioned in the tape. On an FBI transcript dated May 21, 1982, Gene Gotti, Ruggiero, and Mike Coiro, an attorney from Belmore, indicted in the same drug case, on charges. He intimidated a witness to lie before a grand jury. Discuss paying the $5,000 bribe to the guy that's close to Dylan. The bribe, according to a transcript of the tape, is for any information relating to names Coiro will provide the source. But the payment will serve a larger purpose for the family. Gotti tells Ruggiero to make the payment just to get the hook in to a law enforcement official. When Ruggiero, Gotti, and 6 others were arrested on heroin dealing charges in August 1983, federal agents who searched Ruggiero's home found a law enforcement bulletin, a document routinely circulated in police intelligence circles. LaRusso last week refused to identify the target of the bribe scheme or say whether the money had ever been passed. He said the FBI is still investigating the case and that Dylan's office is assisting in the probe. Larry Leff, first Assistant Nassau District Attorney, confirmed the ongoing investigation, but declined further comment. Another example of mob counterintelligence, according to a recent federal indictment, is illustrated by the case of Mildred Russo, a 66-year-old grandmother living on Mulberry Street in Little Italy and working in the federal court clerk's office in Manhattan for more than 13 years. Russo was charged recently with providing confidential documents and information relating to grand jury matters, indictments, and other criminal proceedings to Gambino family members. 2 men charged with her, Joseph Corrao and James Failla, are identified by police as captains in the Gambino family. Russo is identified as the mother-in-law of Manhattan businessman Augustus Sclafani, named in an FBI court affidavit as a Gambino family associate. On occasion, underworld targets learn of investigations unwittingly. Earlier this year, the telephone company notified a suspected narcotics dealer that his telephone was tapped. Such notification is a routine matter for the phone company unless police request otherwise. In this case, an FBI clerk had failed to file the proper forms notifying the phone company that the tap was part of an investigation. The words of mobsters and their associates from public testimony, law enforcement tapes, and their own biographies provide a rare insight into the secret society. They were sitting in a quiet federal room, not an interrogation, not exactly, but the kind of place where the walls were thin and the stakes were heavy. The guy across the table wasn't just some stool pigeon. He'd been a lawyer for men whose names weren't spoken out loud. He carried himself like a man who knew when to shut up But today, he was ready to talk. "Let me ask you something," the investigator began, voice low and careful. "Do guys get paid to carry out hits? I mean, contracts?" The lawyer didn't blink. "Absolutely not," he said, almost insulted. "That's one thing that's not allowed." The agent raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" The answer came like the snap of a match. "Because it's expected. You don't get paid to show loyalty. You owe it. That's the rule." He leaned back, eyes narrowing just slightly, as if he was remembering a dozen things he'd never say out loud. "You gotta understand," he continued. "In that world, it ain't just about doing what you're told. It's about how you do it. Quiet, efficient, no mistakes. And if you're the guy they can count on to make someone disappear without a trace..." He tapped the table once, like a judge hitting the gavel. "That gives you prestige. Some crews want that reputation. They need it. It means they're reliable, dependable. It puts them on the map." The agent just nodded, already scribbling something down. But the lawyer was done talking. That was all he was going to give. Testimony of Martin Light, mob attorney, before the President's Commission on Organized Crime, 1985. The truth didn't come in courtrooms. It came on wires, in whispers, in parking lots and back rooms. It came from the mouths of men who, for the most part, never expected to get caught, and didn't think twice about what they were saying. Take a wiretap from 1982. A Gambino family soldier named Robert DiBernardo was on the phone, talking shop. On the other end, another made guy. The conversation wasn't about business, not the kind the feds like to believe the Mafia was in. It was about death. DiBernardo said Tom Bellotti, a thick-necked, stone-faced skipper who took his orders straight from Paul Castellano, had made it clear. There were 4 captains you could always count on when it came time to pull the trigger: Frankie, Dap, Johnny, Roy, and Bellotti himself. They didn't flinch. They didn't ask. They got the job done. Forget the Hollywood nonsense about fat envelopes full of cash in exchange for a hit. That was for amateurs. Real killers in the life didn't get paid. They got noticed. James "Jimmy the Weasel" Fratiano, a man who'd sent more than a few people to early graves, put it simply in his book, The Last Mafioso. You don't get paid. That's against the rules. You kill when your skipper gives the order, or when it comes down from the boss himself. If you're given the contract, you take the hit. No questions, no discussion. If the boss says clip somebody, you do it. That's the code. A code built on silence, obligation, and the kind of loyalty that came with a body count. And then there was the tape from May 25th, 1983. A wire planted in the Santoro Beverage Company in the Bronx. An unremarkable building that just happened to house the command post of the Lucchese family's upper brass. Anthony Corallo, the boss, had something to say. His voice was calm, like he was ordering dinner. "Yeah, listen to me," he said. "You gotta whack the sun out." Next to him, his underboss Salvatore Tom Mix Santoro didn't miss a beat. "Yeah, whack the son, not the father." They spoke about murder the way civilians spoke about mowing the lawn.